Hello there. I'm Lex, and when I close my eyes, I dream of a galaxy far, far away. Well, in today's episode, I try to make George Lucas proud by painting this large scale Darth Vader diorama. So strap in, we've got a rebellion to crush. Starting off, I do a zenithal highlight over the entire model with Liquitex white ink. I'm going for saturation of where I think the light should hit, so when you do this, be bold here, as the start is really the most recoverable spot for painting a model. The key to this whole video, if I had to pick one, is that the first step is just to make it exist, and then fix it and render it later. My whole style is built upon that principle. It may not be the best or most direct way, but it works for me. And part of watching people on YouTube is to find ways and styles that could possibly work for you. With that done, I start painting the base in a brown-black color from Pro Acryl. This is thinned down in my airbrush, and I'm going as lightly as I can, as I want the white ink that I put down to affect the coat of paint. I want to have as much contrast between the darker spots and the light spots. I then move to Pro Acryl's Dark Umber shade, which is a lighter brown, to get the bigger sections of that color into the base. Once that's all done, I'm going to start dry brushing the base, and I use a mix between a cork board that you can get at an art store and my hand to get the paint loaded on the brush and the amount. I go over the spots where the transitions to white ink are and load up some Vallejo deck tan to put down on the light edge highlights. I use a mix between swiping and stippling to create a texture as well as an effect. Even in the shade, there's going to be reflections off the stormtroopers, so I'm adding some of those areas, highlighted areas that I feel are best suited for it. And once that is done, I go back with the black brown from Pro Acryl to establish the darker sections of the rock. I'm using Morphe brushes, which are a brand of makeup brushes I buy for my wife. I highly recommend them for makeup and models, and you can buy them at Ulta. Just be sure to Sharpie your name on them so that they don't get stolen. Lastly, for the base is to add the start of some OSL for Vader's lightsaber. I put him back into place on the base and roughen the color using some transparent red. Once that's done, I look at it from a distance and make sure that it looks visually correct before going over it with some Pro Acryl titanium white. The reason I'm doing this is because the undertones of the rock will warp the red color, and we really want a hard pop of OSL, as it'll be one of the main focal points for this model. I go over the white with some Vallejo red ink and move on to the figures. The rearmost stormtrooper will have less red, but I still go strong with it as I know I'm going to be painting over this with shades that are going to tone down the saturation. With the base done, I pulled the rear stormtrooper and cover him with that succulent deck tan from Vallejo. I'm going for all over coverage here, as he'll primarily be in the shade, while the white ink will be pigmenting that deck tan to be lighter. I'm trying to leave as much red behind, but also make sure that the transition between the red and the deck tan is smooth. You'll notice that these models aren't perfect and that they have printing issues, but since these are for myself, I'm not really worried about it, and I'm just fine with improvising. Sometimes I don't want to have to sit through another 12-hour print just to get a perfect model. Moving on to Darth Vader, I'm dry brushing and sponging a Pro Acryl blue-black shade into his cape. Everything on Vader will be close to blue on the color spectrum. A good example of this is the Hildebrandt brothers poster from episode 4. It's very iconic and shows that you can use blue for a black color. The only really dark shadows are going to be black, and everything else will have a tint of blue. At this point, I am overwhelmed. The cape is huge, and with so much area to go over, I was worried about how I was going to be able to pull off this technique. I continued though throughout using the makeup sponge to put that blue-black shade where the white ink was sprayed down. As mentioned before, make it exist first. My goal is to get as much paint down as fast as possible and try to get rid of those nerves by engaging with the model. I move on to the main approach that I use, which is best described as like a painterly approach. I'm rendering big sections with black where I think shadows are going to contrast the blue that I put down. To do this, I've used a reference photo from Star Wars Episode 5 to see how reflective his armor is, as well as watch a couple videos and cuts from the Obi-Wan show and Rogue One, and a myriad of places. This is to mainly find the volumes and shapes that I want to incorporate, as the reflections are going to be distinct based on the lighting that he's in. The black I used was Abaddon Black from Citadel Paints, and I go through the whole model just blocking in the shades really roughly. It doesn't need to be perfect, it's pretty messy, but it's quick and fast. For more detailed work, I used a size 1 brush and started pumping in the NMM-like shading. Since his armor is glossy, I want there to be reflections without using a varnish. And since those reflections can't just be stark white, I'm using shades of blue. The main ones that I'm using are Pro Acryl's white blue, their Payne's gray, and their blue black. At this point, I decided on a reference photo that had the light appearing at a 3/4 effect versus dead on. I felt like it highlighted the brow of his helmet better and his face more dramatically. So with a brush, I go over everything in that minty white blue color and block out the highlights on top of the blue black shades that we went over prior. The main thing I wanted to ensure was that his puffy jacket-like undersuit is glossy to match his helmet, pauldron, and some of the brightest highlighted cloth as well. I go over areas I also think will be lit up by his lightsaber in the same white-blue tint. These spots will not be fully lit as his sleeves have wrinkles, so I wanted the highest points to have the shades of reds and magentas as we paint those later that will mix with that white-blue color. Something you notice throughout this video is I'm constantly moving around the model. That's because of that painterly approach that I use. It's constantly rendering and trying to increase those values and spread them apart layer by layer. Once I feel happy about the highlights, I double back to adding black and the blue black into the shaded areas. I want the shadows to be dark, and sometimes you just need to cut back in the areas that you painted and need more work. This part of the process for me is both a joy and a pain. As you see, the more I pull those opposite values, the more I have to balance it across the model. For example, right now, in Vader's glove being outstretched, it's as shiny as his helmet. And that's not correct. The highlights need to be less than the extreme light bounced off of his armor. I'll fix this later, but I'm painting and I'm constantly going back and forth between various areas, rendering and just trying to, like I said, make it exist. These layers aren't going to be buttery smooth, and that's okay. This isn't a showcase piece for a competition. And while I could have done this with an airbrush, it wouldn't have the look I was going for. It would have been too smooth and too plain to look at. Having these tones show up in a more organic or sloppy way, however you want to call it. Now, I'm at the point of fixing the mistakes. Since I had planned for a front view lighting effect, I had painted the pauldron uniformly and without a shadow from his helmet. Because his brightest highlight was painted on the rear of the helmet, I took my cell phone and pointed it at that highlight and then tried to observe and took note of where the shadow line was created. Simple tricks like that really takes the work out of painting in my mind. You let physics do the heavy lifting versus using your imagination. And while I'm all for using my imagination, once you're 20 to 30 hours into a single model or diorama, I'll take whatever help I can get. I start back into the sleeve and add more values and render more shadows. And while I'm doing this, I bounce back up to the top of his helmet and create a highlight that would spread across his helmet since it's spherical. And then I go back to the pauldron and start revising my highlight shapes. At this point, I'm exhausted with how much ground we've covered. While it's only been 20-ish minutes for you guys, it's been 2 or 3 days for me, and painting 12 hours a day. I bring out the dry brush again as it's the most effective tool for creating a fabric texture and bringing up the highlights in the fabric. I mix in the blues and the blacks to make sure that they read properly, and with that done, it's to my favorite part of the piece, the lightsaber OSL, or object source lighting. Because I left the white behind on his armor, I was able to go in with a red ink from Vallejo again and get the pinkish magenta hues without having to mix anything. The ink is so thin that you can build the layers slowly if you'd like, and anywhere with a blue left behind would turn the red ink magenta, which takes a ton of the work out. I go back and pump in some of the blue-black hues into the spots to try and push that effect further, and going back and forth between the red ink and the blue paint. The goal here isn't pure red, it's to try and get an effect of Vader's clothing mixing with red ink to form the off hues that will read as a glow. I keep building the effect until I feel satisfied and take breaks along the way by going to other spots within the model. I pivot back to the base to pump up the glow effect. I use some Pro Acryl dark magenta paint for this and just dry brush spots that would read like they're getting light that has bounced off the stormtroopers and Vader versus from his lightsaber directly. I put the stormtrooper in place and start working on painting him. He had a lot of issues in the printer, and that led to me having to use a ton of filler putty. So I decided that the texture of mud would read really well, and it would save me a ton of sanding. And it looks like he had fallen trying to get to the front lines ahead of the other stormtrooper with Vader. Using the dark umber paint from Pro Acryl, I do the same to the other stormtrooper this time, allowing him some dignity to be lightly coated in mud versus caked on. With all the mud put in, I go to work on the details. At this point, I'm pretty confident, so I might as well ask, what do you think, Obi-Wan?
Let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
Oh, I know what you're doing. You're talking about that one scene in episode 4 where Luke puts on the helmet. Let me go give that a shot. But with this blast shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to paint?
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them.
Oh! I won't be doing the brushed effect like I did with Vader, so the detail work will go by rather quickly with the stormtroopers. I pulled up a reference photo to see what areas needed black, as I don't have them memorized, and also note details like tiny line work and their green-hued lenses. One big takeaway was that I needed to use an oil wash, and that it's more preferable to use that versus panel liner from Tamiya. I tried to get the effect to work, but it always muddied up the off-white paint, so I won't be using it for my models going forward. A tube of black oil paint and some white spirits to dilute it into a wash will be the method I do going forward. I dry brush the guns after they are painted with black with some metallic gray and move on to priming the lightsaber blade itself. While that dries, I'll go to the other stormtrooper and fill out the details with that number 1 brush again. All of this was with synthetic brushes throughout this video, as I haven't had the chance to purchase and try out Kolinsky Sable hairbrushes, so I'm looking forward to picking up a few here in the near future, as the tips kind of gave up after a couple days. A technique for really tight squares or sharp lines is to fill the paint up to the line but not the corners, and then go in at a 45-degree angle relative to that, right, where the corner is at, and put your paintbrush smack dab in the middle of that corner. This gives you razor sharp corners and lines, and it works in all situations with a paintbrush. I finish out the helmet with some black and the green lenses, and I also add a specular highlight to the lenses. I add 2 of them to the helmets, one larger than the other, to help read as something less human, because in my opinion, one specular highlight almost makes it look like an eyeball. Saber, and then use Vallejo ink again to paint the whole saber. The effect I'm going for is that the 2 sides of the saber, the top and the bottom from the viewing angle, will be red, with the center being white. This gives a saber that looks like it's actually lit versus being just a red popsicle stick. Despite the video being sped up, you can see how slow I go painting this line. You want it to be as straight as possible, and once you have that good line put in, you can go over it again and pump up the value, fading it as you get to the tip. At the top of the saber, I'm putting in more white to make it almost a fully white cylinder, and letting the OSL technique be the red to trick your brain into thinking that it's lit. I really love this look, and it makes me super happy that I was able to pull it off. Sometimes it's not the simplest thing to do. Once I have the top line put in, I put in the bottom line and add a bunch of speckles to the saber to make it look more like a lightsaber that's been flickering, sort of how episode 4 looked versus how the modern episodes look. With that, it's just adding the final touches of the chest panel and belt and gluing down the model, and we can call this model done. So there you have it. One giant Darth Vader and 2 happy little stormtroopers. So what did I do right? Well, I think the OSL and the lightsaber is probably the best part of this model. I was really happy with how it came out, and the overall reading from afar as well as close up looks incredible to me. I'm super proud, and I don't think I could have done very much better than what I've pulled off. Let me know in the comments if you think that there's something that I could improve upon, or if there was something that you think that should have happened that I missed. What did I do wrong? Well, I decided that in 2026 I would start posting videos on artwork that I would make. And as a result, I had committed to the goal of 1 video per month for the year. It is currently 9:40 p.m. on the last day of January, so I'm rushing to get this video out the door. I probably had the model printed the second week of January and committed a weekend on with Martin Luther King weekend to paint the entirety of the figure. That led to the blends with the paintbrush being a little rushed, well, more than a little rushed, but it also led to the second focal point, the helmet, that maybe not looking as pretty as it could have been. So what did I learn? Well, picking the blue color palette for Darth Vader really forced me to establish the shapes and volumes with the highlights. There was no way to hide behind just painting it black. So I really am happy about how I pushed myself and felt uncomfortable, but the overall result I'm pretty pleased with. I also learned that, to me, a panel liner is probably not going to cut it for me. Using it on a white model led to a lot of problems and having to go and do cutbacks and repaint certain sections. So I really need to try out an oil wash based on Vince Venturella's recommendations. If there's anything technique-wise that you need to learn, Vince EV has some of the best videos that helps break it down and make it super simple, and I've been consuming his content for months and months now, and I really enjoy everything that he puts out. So I highly recommend, if you're looking to learn some things, head over to his channel and take a look. The circle is now complete. I think we can call this project a success. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you want me to paint. I've got a lot of fun plans this year, ranging from Warhammer minis, busts, Star Wars figures, and other large-scale dioramas like this one. So subscribe and ring the bell as I share my experiences, perspectives, and artwork. Thanks.